Macbeth is a story of revenge. Macbeth is a story of horror. Horror of how a character changes from being epitome of bravery, heroism, to that of shame and indignity. And at the same time, it is also a story about how a character emerges as a tragic hero. Hello and a very warm welcome to the viewers of Nibblepop. Today I am here to tell you the story of Macbeth, written by William Shakespeare. We will be covering the entire play over a series of classes, but before that I wanted you to know the story so that it will be easier for you to follow the classes and also enjoy them. The story of Macbeth is set in Scotland. Once upon a time, the King of Scotland, Duncan, was threatened by the rebellious person called Macdonald, who joined hands with the Norwegian king as well as the Thane of Cawdor to attack the kingdom of Duncan. In order to defeat these rebels and attackers, Duncan sent his army, and Macbeth and Banquo were his chief generals. They fought fiercely and defeated Macdonald and his group. While returning from that battle, Macbeth, who was the Thane of Glamis — Thane means a ruler under the king who acts like a sub-ruler. So Macbeth was returning from this battlefield with his friend Banquo, and he came upon a place which was a heathland, and there he met three unusual characters who looked like women but did not appear to be so. They were the Weird Sisters, whom we can also casually call witches. Now, what did these three witches do, or Weird Sisters do? They greeted Macbeth, first calling him the Thane of Glamis, which he was, and then they said, "Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." Cawdor is another place. Macbeth was not the Thane of Cawdor yet, so he was a bit surprised. He didn't know why the witches were greeting him in this particular manner. And then they called him, "Hail to thee, who will be the king." Listening to these prophecies, Banquo also wanted them to prophesize for him. They said that Banquo will be greater than Macbeth but lesser, not so happy yet much happier. He will not himself be a king but will be father to a line of kings. Banquo was happy with these prophecies because he was a logical man who understood that these things should not be actually acted upon with much seriousness. But Macbeth, he started to think about these prophecies very seriously. While this was happening on the other end of the kingdom, Duncan got the news of Macbeth's success and the betrayal of the existing Thane of Cawdor. So he ordered the execution of the Thane of Cawdor and decided to transfer that title to Macbeth. So you see, while the witches were calling Macbeth the Thane of Cawdor, he was already made the Thane of Cawdor but didn't know about it. Anyway, soon Macbeth and Banquo, they were greeted by the king's men who brought with them the news that Macbeth was promoted with an additional thaneship, which is like he was now the Thane of Cawdor along with being the Thane of Glamis. Macbeth and Banquo, they meet the king, and there the king announces that he will be visiting Macbeth's castle very soon to have dinner. In the meantime, Macbeth is seen to be very disturbed by these prophecies and the incidents that were happening, because on that same occasion, Duncan, he pronounced his son Malcolm as his successor. Now, Duncan had two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, and Macbeth was somehow related to the king, but not directly a successor. The prophecy of the witches that Macbeth would be the king sparked in Macbeth the kind of ambition which he possibly already had of being a king. But when he came to know that Duncan is going to announce Malcolm as his successor, the dream of becoming the next king of Scotland got a setback. He wrote to his wife, a very powerful woman, about all these things, and we see that Lady Macbeth, she prepares a special kind of welcome for Duncan, which bears a dagger. She decides to kill the king when he comes and stays with them. We see Macbeth reaching his castle, the castle of Inverness. He speaks to his wife about the arrival of the king. The king arrives. We see that Macbeth at first decides against killing Duncan. He thinks that if it's a prophecy, I'm going to be the king anyway. But Lady Macbeth, she wants to hold on to the idea of becoming royal figures, and she instigates Macbeth that no, if you have decided to kill the king, you must kill the king. Finally, we see that Duncan arrives at Macbeth's castle, is very happy with the kind of welcome he has received, and Lady Macbeth plays an extraordinary role of a beautiful hostess, and he is very impressed. Duncan is very impressed. At night, when Duncan falls asleep, Lady Macbeth sends Macbeth with daggers to kill the king. Macbeth goes, stabs the king. He feels that two of the guards who were guarding the chamber of the king, they were drunk, but somehow they were witnesses to his crime. He returns to his wife, his hand all filled with blood. His wife says that, why are you so shaken? We can always clean this blood up with little water. She asks him to go back, place the daggers beside the drunk bodies of the guards. Macbeth is horrified and doesn't want to do that. What he does is he asks his wife to do that for him, and his wife goes back with the daggers, places them beside the bodies of the guards to implicate them in the murder, and comes back. They decide to look fresh and unsuspicious to the people when they discovered the body of Duncan in the morning. Morning comes, King's loyal Macduff comes to receive the king, to take him back to his palace, which is in Dunsinane, but he discovers that the king has been murdered. He is very, very shocked. He is scared and doesn't know what to do. He screams and wakes people up in the castle of Macbeth. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, they try to appear very surprised, very shocked, as if they don't know anything. Lady Macbeth, she faints to prove her point. And what Macbeth does is, in this confusion, he kills the two guards, fearing that they might bear witness against him. So that leaves no trace as to who actually killed the king. But then again, this whole thing leads to a lot of suspicion in the minds of Macduff, and a lot of suspicion in the minds of the king's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, who decide to run away. Malcolm runs away to England and Donalbain runs away to Ireland, because they know that their lives were also at risk now. Because Malcolm was absent, Macbeth was next in line, so people crowned him. We don't see Banquo very happy about it, because Banquo had known about the prophecy all along, and he was always suspicious of Macbeth's motives, because he was very close to Macbeth and he knew him very well. Macbeth knew this, and he was always wary of Banquo's character, what Banquo could do to harm him, to destabilize him. And somehow, despite being a king, Macbeth as well as Lady Macbeth both were feeling pretty uneasy because they were thinking that there are many loose ends and people can catch them somehow and punish them and dethrone them. So what Macbeth does is he arranges for a banquet, a party, and he invites everybody. He invites his friend Banquo too, and he wants him to be present in this party. But before that, Banquo goes for a horse ride with his son. Macbeth engages murderers to kill Banquo and his son. Why his son? Because the witches had prophesied that Banquo's children will be kings, but they did not prophesy that Macbeth's children will be kings. So Macbeth, who was at this moment childless, he was very insecure by the presence of Fleance and he wanted to get rid of both of them. He instructed the murderers to do this. Now these murderers, they had some grudge against Banquo and they agreed. They attacked Banquo, Fleance escaped and Banquo was killed. This happened just before the banquet or the dinner party that Macbeth was throwing. Macbeth was seen at the dinner party. Banquo was definitely absent. Macbeth raises a toast to all his guests and he mentions that he misses Banquo. And right then Banquo's ghost enters. Yes, ghosts have a lot of role to play in Shakespeare's plays, and here we see Banquo's ghost whom nobody else can see except Macbeth, and Macbeth is visibly shaken because he feels scared. He feels that somehow his actions have been revealed, that he has been compromised. Lady Macbeth takes the whole situation under control, convinces everybody that Macbeth is not well, they should go back to their houses and leave him alone. She urges Macbeth to take rest, to get some sleep, although we know that they are not going to get any peaceful sleep. Soon we see that Macbeth wants to make sure about his future and he decides to go back to that heathland to meet those witches again. When he meets them, he wants to ask about what's going to happen to him next. And they speak to him in the form of certain images and voices which tell that first, Macbeth should be aware of Macduff. That Macduff who first discovered the body of Duncan. That Macduff who was always very loyal to Duncan. Then they said that no man born of a woman can harm Macbeth. Now Macbeth was pleased because every man is born of a woman. So he felt that he is practically immune to any enemy attack. They had also said that he is not going to be killed until and unless the Burnham forest comes down to the city of Dunsinane. Now, a forest cannot actually walk down to a city, so Macbeth felt very good about it. Macbeth felt that if Macduff was a man, and since no man could harm him, that is how he felt, then he could let Macduff be. But no, he wanted to make things certain for himself, and he decided to attack Macduff and his family. He employs people, he engages people who go and attack Macduff's castle, but they see that Macduff was already away. Still, they mercilessly kill his wife and his kids and everybody else in the castle of Macduff. Macduff, while this was happening, he had actually gone to meet Malcolm in England. There, he joined hands with Malcolm to take revenge on Macbeth because he was sure, beyond doubt, that Macbeth was behind the murder of Duncan. Now, while they gathered forces with the help of the English king, we see that Macbeth, he is going through increasing fits of desperation. The relationship which he had with his wife was breaking down completely. Now they couldn't even speak to each other. Two people who always were very close to each other, they called themselves partners of greatness. They were now moving apart. Lady Macbeth, she couldn't sleep at night. She always felt that her hands were soiled with blood of king, and she wanted to wash them. And no matter how much she washed, she felt that she was not clean. She turned into a mad woman and she dies. Perhaps she commits a suicide. Macbeth, knowing about his wife's death, is heartbroken, but he knows that eventually this would have happened. Finally, we see the forces of Malcolm and Macduff and the English soldiers. They arrive on the Dunsinane Hill. They decide to go for a camouflaged attack, and they use the branches of trees to hide themselves while they were marching down. So the whole thing looked as if the forest of Burnham Wood, where they were hiding, was coming down at Dunsinane. When Macbeth came to know about this, he understood that somehow trusting these weird sisters, trusting these witches was a mistake. But he had no option but to fight. He decides to fight. A fight breaks, and after a lot of commotion, he comes face to face with Macduff. Macbeth is still sure that Macduff cannot kill him because Macduff is born of a woman. But then Macduff informs him that he is born of a woman, but he was taken from her womb before the completion of his term. He was untimely raped. So he was not technically born of a woman because he matured outside the womb. Now Macbeth realized that his end has come. He fights, but Macduff kills Macbeth, beheads him, and that brings the story to an end. We see that Macbeth is killed, his wife is dead, and after this reign of darkness, Malcolm is brought to the throne, he is crowned, and he decides to restore peace and happiness to the land of Scotland. This is the story of Macbeth, and while I was telling the story, I realized that this story itself, which is taken from Holinshed, which is a part of history, is dramatic, but it hardly gives you the kind of goosebumps, the kind of awe that reading that play, watching the performance of that play gives you. I'm sure when we will be going through the acts, through the scenes, through the important lines and passages in Macbeth, we will see how this story of desire, revenge, ambition is turned into poetry by the master of words, William Shakespeare. So stay tuned for this series, which is going to be up very soon. Stay subscribed and keep commenting. Have a very nice time. This is Monami Mukherjee. Like, share and subscribe to my channel. Bye-bye.